Former reality TV star is now in police custody tonight for allegedly molesting a 9-year-old girl back in 2020. Joseph Duggar.
It's former reality TV star Joseph Duggar in court, facing charges that threaten to send him to jail for decades.
Everyone is talking about Joseph Duggar. His name is trending, his mugshot is everywhere. News outlets are running wall-to-wall coverage of his arrest, his charges, his bond. And yes, that story matters. But there is another name attached to this case that has been quietly, almost deliberately pushed to the back of every headline. A name that comes with its own charges, its own booking, its own court date, and almost no one is asking the questions that need to be asked about her. His wife was arrested too. Kendra Duggar was booked. She was charged. 8 counts. Not 1, not 2. 8 separate criminal charges filed against the woman who has spent years presenting herself to the world as the picture of devoted Christian motherhood. 8 charges that tell a story the mainstream media is not telling you. And today, on this channel, we are going to change that. If this is the kind of deep, unfiltered truth-telling that you've been looking for, hit that like button right now, because this story is not going away, and neither are we. Now let's get into it. Let's start with who Kendra Duggar actually is, or at least who she was sold to the world as being. She married Joseph Duggar in September of 2017. She was 19 years old, he was 22. The wedding, like everything in the Duggar universe, was a public spectacle. Cameras rolling, smiles wide, TLC ready. It was presented as a fairy tale. 2 young people from deeply conservative Christian families uniting in holy matrimony, committing themselves to faith, family, and the values they were raised with. Kendra came from that exact same world. Her father, Paul Caldwell, is a pastor. She grew up in the church. She was raised inside a religious framework that defines the roles of husband and wife in very specific, very traditional ways. The husband leads, the wife follows. The family protects itself. The outside world is not always to be trusted. These are not my characterizations. These are the stated values of the community she came from. After the wedding, Kendra built a public image that was almost perfectly constructed for that audience. She posted family photos. She talked about motherhood. She shared faith-based content. She positioned herself as a woman who had found her calling, raising children, supporting her husband, living according to her beliefs. She and Joseph have 4 children together. By every public measure, she was playing the role flawlessly. And then came the arrest. Here are the charges against Kendra Duggar, and I want you to hear every single one of them clearly, because this is where the story stops being background noise and starts becoming something much more serious. Kendra was charged with 4 counts of endangering the welfare of a minor in the 2nd degree. She was also charged with 4 counts of false imprisonment in the 2nd degree. All 8 charges are classified as misdemeanors under Arkansas law. She was released on a bond of $1,470. Now I want you to hold that number for a second. Joseph's bond was set at $600,000. Kendra's was set at $1,470. That difference in bond amounts tells you something about how the court views the relative severity of what each of them is alleged to have done. But make no mistake, misdemeanor does not mean minor, it does not mean innocent, and it absolutely does not mean unimportant. 8 charges filed against a mother of 4 is not a footnote, it is a headline. It just hasn't been treated like one. So let's break down what these charges actually mean in plain language. Endangering the welfare of a minor in the 2nd degree under Arkansas statute refers to conduct by a person who knowingly engages in behaviour that creates a substantial risk of harm to a child's physical or mental welfare. The key word there is knowingly. This is not a charge you get for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is a charge that investigators believe reflects awareness, some level of knowledge, some form of action, or perhaps more telling, inaction. 4 counts means 4 children. Kendra and Joseph have 4 kids together. The math is not complicated. Now let's talk about the false imprisonment charges, because this one requires some context to fully understand. False imprisonment, legally speaking, means the unlawful restraint of a person's freedom of movement. In the 2nd degree, this typically involves restraint without physical violence, but restraint nonetheless. It means preventing someone from leaving a space or situation when they have the right to do so. There is a detail in this case that connects directly to that charge, and it has been reported in several outlets, though it hasn't received nearly the attention it deserves. Investigators found evidence of an exterior lock on a door inside the Duggar home, the kind of lock that is placed on the outside of a door, which means it can only be locked from the outside. Think about that. A lock on the outside of a door in a home where children live. Who does that lock, and who allows it to remain? 4 counts of false imprisonment, 4 children, an exterior lock. The charges against Kendra Duggar are telling a story. We just have to be willing to read it. Now let's talk about what we know and what remains deeply unclear about the timeline of Kendra's involvement and her knowledge of what was allegedly happening. The incident at the centre of Joseph's charges is alleged to have taken place in Florida in 2020. That's 6 years ago. 6 years. Joseph and Kendra were together in 2020. They were a married couple living in the same home, raising children together, posting family content on social media. If this incident occurred during a family vacation or trip, the question of whether Kendra was present is not a trivial one. It is perhaps the most important question in her entire case. Investigators are not in the habit of charging people with 8 criminal counts based on nothing. The fact that charges were filed against her, specifically charges that include the word knowingly in their legal definition, suggests that prosecutors believe there is evidence connecting her to an awareness of what was happening. That evidence could take many forms. It could be digital, it could be testimony, it could be physical evidence found in the home. We don't know the full picture yet, but the charges themselves are a signal. 6 years pass between the alleged Florida incident and these arrests. 6 years of marriage, 6 years of children growing up in that household, 6 years of social media posts and public appearances and church attendance and family photos. And somewhere inside those 6 years, according to the state of Arkansas, something was happening that endangered the welfare of children. Something that involved, in some capacity, their mother. That is not a story anyone seems to want to sit with. But it's the story we have to sit with if we're actually serious about understanding this case. On March 20th of this year, Joseph Duggar made a phone call from jail. He called Kendra. The call was recorded, as all jail calls are, and a recording was subsequently obtained by People magazine, which reported on its contents. According to the reporting, Joseph told Kendra that he had been placed in solitary confinement. He told her he was spending his time reading the Bible. He expressed himself in terms that painted a picture of a man leaning on his faith during a difficult moment. And Kendra responded with sympathy. Now, I want to be careful here, because I am not going to tell you what to feel about that call. What I will do is ask the question that any responsible journalist or commentator should ask. What does that conversation tell us? What does it mean when a woman who is herself facing 8 criminal charges, charges that allege she knowingly endangered her own children, responds to her husband's jail call with comfort and sympathy? There are multiple ways to interpret that. One is that she is a devoted wife who, regardless of what happens legally, maintains her bond with the person she married. That is a human response. People do not stop loving someone the moment they are charged with a crime. Another interpretation is that their shared narrative, their shared story of what happened and what they knew, is still intact. That they are, in some sense, coordinating, even from opposite sides of a jail wall. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm asking the questions that the charges demand. Because here's the thing. Kendra Duggar is not a bystander in this case. She is not. Sympathetic figure, standing outside a courtroom, waiting for answers. She is a defendant. She has 8 charges of her own. And the fact that her response to a jailed husband appears to be one of support rather than confrontation raises questions that go far beyond a single phone call. Let's talk about what happens next from a legal standpoint, because this is where things get genuinely complicated in ways that most coverage is not exploring. Joseph and Kendra Duggar are married. They are co-defendants in a case that involves their shared household and their shared children. That creates a legal situation with layers that any serious defence attorney is going to have to navigate very carefully. The first question is whether they share legal representation. In cases involving co-defendants, especially when those defendants are married and the charges overlap, there is a significant risk of what's called a conflict of interest. A single attorney cannot simultaneously serve the best interests of two clients whose legal strategies might diverge. If Joseph's best defence involves placing more responsibility on Kendra, and Kendra's best defence involves placing more responsibility on Joseph, then one attorney cannot represent both of them. They will almost certainly need separate counsel. The second question is spousal privilege. In Arkansas, as in most states, there is a legal principle that generally protects communications between spouses from being introduced as evidence in court. But that privilege has limits. It varies by jurisdiction. It does not apply in all circumstances. And critically, in cases involving crimes against children, courts have sometimes found ways around spousal privilege when the interests of protecting minors are at stake. Whether that privilege protects that March 20th phone call or any other communication between Joseph and Kendra is a question their attorneys are almost certainly wrestling with right now. The third question is whether either of them might consider a plea arrangement. Prosecutors frequently use plea deals in cases with multiple defendants as a way of securing testimony against the more culpable party. If Kendra's charges are, in the prosecution's view, less severe than Joseph's, and the bond disparity suggests they may see it that way, then there is a scenario in which Kendra is offered a deal in exchange for cooperation. That is not speculation, that is standard prosecutorial strategy. What would that mean for this case? What would it mean for their marriage? What would it mean for their 4 children? These are the questions that will define the next several months of this story, and right now, Kendra Duggar is saying nothing. Her social media has gone quiet. Her accounts, which once offered a steady stream of family updates and faith-based content, have fallen silent. There are no posts, no statements, no carefully worded messages from a family spokesperson. Nothing. Legally, that silence makes complete sense. Any competent defence attorney will tell their client to say absolutely nothing publicly when facing criminal charges. Every word you say can be used against you. The silence is almost certainly on advice of counsel, but silence communicates things, even when it is legally strategic. The woman who built her public identity around being present, visible, and vocal about her family has nothing to say right now. The platform she used to project an image of wholesome Christian motherhood has gone dark. And in that darkness, 8 criminal charges are sitting on the record, waiting for a courtroom. Her court date is April 29th. That date is coming, and when it arrives, we will be watching every single development. We will be here to break it down, to cut through the spin, and to ask the questions that too many people in this media landscape are too polite or too afraid to ask. We left with silence. Kendra Duggar's social media dark. Her public voice was completely gone. 8 criminal charges sitting on the court record with a court date of April 29th circled on the calendar. And a phone call from a jail cell that raised more questions than it answered. But silence is not the whole story, not even close. Because to truly understand how we got here, how a woman raised in the church, married in the church, living her entire public life inside the framework of faith and family values, ended up booked on 8 criminal charges involving her own children, you have to understand the world she came from. You have to be willing to look honestly at the structure that shaped her, defined her role, and may have created the conditions under which something this serious could go unaddressed for 6 years. That is what part 2 is about. And I want to warn you, this part of the story is harder. It is more uncomfortable. It asks questions that some people are going to find deeply unsettling. But uncomfortable questions are exactly the ones we need to be asking. So let's go. The Duggar family is not just a family. It has never been just a family. From the moment they appeared on television, first in a documentary special, then in the long-running TLC series 19 Kids and Counting, they were a brand, a movement, a living advertisement for a very specific version of Christian family life. That version of family life is rooted in a theological and social framework that has specific, clearly defined roles for every member of the household. The father is the spiritual head. The husband leads and provides. The wife submits, supports, and follows. Children are raised to obey. Modesty, purity, and obedience are not just values, they are requirements. And the family unit is treated as something sacred, something that must be protected from outside scrutiny at almost any cost. This is not a framework I am inventing or distorting. This is documented. It is stated explicitly in the religious materials that guided the Duggar family's upbringing and lifestyle. The specific movement they have been associated with, sometimes referred to as the Christian patriarchy movement, or connected to the ATI curriculum developed by Bill Gothard, places enormous emphasis on the authority of the husband and father, and on the duty of wives and children to defer to that authority. Now here is the question I want you to sit with. Not a verdict, not an accusation, a question. If a woman is raised from birth inside a structure that tells her the husband is the head of the household, that his authority is God-given and not to be questioned, that the role of a wife is to support and submit, what does that do to her capacity to act independently when something goes wrong inside that household? What does it do to her ability to draw a line, to say no, to report something to someone outside the family? What does it do to her sense of where her responsibility ends and his begins? I am not asking that question to excuse anyone. I am asking it because the answer matters. It matters legally, it matters morally, and it matters if we want to have any honest conversation about how mistreatment and neglect can persist inside families that look, from the outside, like everything is perfectly fine. Kendra Caldwell grew up as a pastor's daughter. She was 19 when she married Joseph Duggar, 19. She had spent her entire life inside a world where the structures we just described were not background noise. They were the air she breathed. She had never known anything different. And when she entered the Duggar family, she entered a household that was perhaps the most publicly visible example of that exact framework anywhere in America. Think about what that means in practice. Think about what it means to be a 19-year-old woman, newly married, stepping into a family where cameras have documented your in-laws' lifestyle for years, where the expectations of wifely behaviour are not just encouraged, but performed for a national audience, where the pressure to embody the ideal, faithful wife, devoted mother, submissive partner, is both internal and external, both personal and public. That is not a situation that produces independent thinking. That is not an environment that makes it easy to question, to push back, to say, something is wrong here and I need to do something about it. That kind of environment by design produces compliance. And again, I want to be very precise here. Compliance is not the same as innocence. Understanding why someone might have stayed silent, might have deferred, might have failed to act, that understanding does not erase legal responsibility. The charges against Kendra Duggar are real. The alleged harm to those children is real. The court will not accept "I was raised to submit" as a complete defence, nor should it. But if we are serious about preventing this kind of thing from happening again, in this family or in any family, then we have to be willing to look at the soil in which it grew. We have to ask what kind of structures, what kind of belief systems, what kind of community dynamics create the conditions where a mother of 4 ends up facing 8 criminal charges related to the welfare of her own children? That question is not comfortable, but it is necessary. Let me take you back to 2020 for a moment, because the timeline here is something that deserves more scrutiny than it has received. The incident at the centre of this case allegedly occurred in Florida in 2020. Joseph and Kendra had been married for 3 years at that point. They already had children together. They were a family unit, living together, travelling together. And according to investigators, the events that gave rise to these charges happened during what may have been a family trip. From 2020 to 2025, 5 years passed. During those 5 years, Kendra continued to post on social media. She continued to appear at family events. she continued to present the image of a thriving, faithful, happy family. Whatever was happening inside that home, whatever the exterior lock on that door represented, whatever circumstances led investigators to believe that children were endangered and unlawfully restrained, none of it was visible from the outside. That is a long time for something serious to go unaddressed. And it raises a question that I think is the central question of Kendra's case. Not just what did she know, but when did she know it? And what did she do with that knowledge over the course of 5 years? Because here is what the charges imply. They imply that this was not a single isolated incident that Kendra stumbled across and was too shocked to process. The 4 counts of endangering welfare, the 4 counts of false imprisonment, that pattern suggests something that was, at some level, ongoing or repeated. It suggests a household environment, not a single moment. And that makes the passage of time even more significant. 5 years of knowing, or 5 years of choosing not to know, or 5 years of being inside a structure that told her that what happened inside the family stayed inside the family. The court is going to have to sort out which of those it was. And depending on the answer, Kendra Duggar's legal future looks very different. Let's talk about what happens in that courtroom on April 29th and what might happen in the months that follow. The first hearing on April 29th is unlikely to be a trial. In Arkansas, as in most jurisdictions, early court dates in misdemeanor cases typically involve arraignment, where the defendant enters a formal plea, or preliminary hearings to address procedural matters. It is possible that Kendra enters a not guilty plea and the case continues from there. It is also possible that by April 29th, conversations between her attorneys and the prosecution have already begun to shape what comes next. Here is what the prosecution almost certainly wants. They have Joseph Duggar facing felony charges. Felony. The kind of charges that carry significant prison time. The kind of charges that, if proven, represent serious harm to children. What prosecutors want in a case like this is a conviction that reflects the full weight of what allegedly happened. And one of the most reliable ways to achieve that is through the testimony of someone who was there, someone who was inside that household, someone who can speak to what Joseph did, what was known, and what was allowed to continue. That person potentially is Kendra. I am not saying she will cooperate. I am not saying she will testify against her husband. What I am saying is that the prosecution has a significant incentive to offer her something. A reduced charge, a deferred sentence, some form of leniency in exchange for her cooperation. And Kendra Duggar has her own significant incentive to consider that offer very seriously. Because 8 charges, even 8 misdemeanor charges, can result in jail time, fines, and the very real possibility of losing custody of her children. She has 4 kids. Whatever else is true, those 4 children are presumably the most important thing in her world. And a mother who is facing the possibility of losing access to her children has a powerful motivation to make decisions that protect her ability to be present in their lives. That is the calculation happening right now, behind the silence, behind the darkened social media accounts, behind the closed doors of whatever attorney's office is handling her case. Spousal privilege may offer some protection, but as I noted in part 1, that privilege is not absolute, particularly in cases involving harm to children. Courts have discretion. Prosecutors are creative. And if the evidence against Joseph is strong enough without Kendra's testimony, that changes the calculus entirely, because then the prosecution doesn't need to offer her much of anything. They can pursue both cases independently. What we do not yet know is how strong that evidence is. We don't know what the investigators found beyond what has been reported. We don't know what digital records exist, what witnesses may have come forward, what the children themselves may have said. All of that will emerge in the months ahead. There is one more dimension of this story that I think deserves to be spoken plainly, and it is the dimension that connects the Duggar case to something much larger than one family in Arkansas. The religious framework that shaped this family, that shaped Kendra's understanding of her role as a wife, her duty to her husband, her place within the household, is not unique to the Duggars. It is not a fringe belief held by a tiny community of outliers. It is a framework that influences thousands of families across this country. Families who homeschool their children specifically to protect them from outside influence. Families who operate according to a strict hierarchy of authority in which the father's word is essentially final. Families in which women are taught from childhood that submission is not just a preference, it is a spiritual obligation. Inside those families, the mechanisms that society relies on to protect children, teachers who notice something is wrong, doctors who ask questions, social workers who investigate, those mechanisms are deliberately kept at a distance. Homeschooled children don't have teachers to confide in. Families that are suspicious of outside authority don't welcome social workers. Women who have been raised to believe that their husband's authority supersedes their own judgment don't call the police. I am not saying every family that holds these values is a family where children are being harmed. That would be wrong, and it would be unfair to the vast majority of people who hold these beliefs and live by them without causing harm to anyone. What I am saying is that when mistreatment does occur inside these structures, it is uniquely difficult to detect, uniquely difficult to report, and uniquely difficult to prosecute. Because the entire architecture of the community is designed, however unintentionally, to keep what happens inside the family. The Duggar case is an extreme example, but it is not a unique one. And if the only thing we take from this story is that Joseph Duggar is a bad person who did a terrible thing, then we have missed the deeper lesson entirely. The deeper lesson is about structures, about what we build, what we call sacred, and what we allow to remain hidden behind the walls of faith and family. Kendra Duggar has a court date on April 29th. She has 8 criminal charges on the record. She has 4 children whose lives are being shaped right now in real time by decisions being made inside attorneys' offices and across jail phone calls and in the quiet of a house where the social media has gone dark. She has not said a word publicly, not one. And the questions that surround her, what she knew, when she knew it, what she did with that knowledge, what role the world she was raised in played in shaping her choices, those questions do not have answers yet. They will be answered, piece by piece, in a courthouse in Arkansas over the months ahead. But here is what I know right now. Every major outlet that has covered this story has treated Kendra Duggar as a sidebar, as a footnote, as the wife of the man who was arrested, rather than as a defendant in her own right, with her own charges and her own legal jeopardy and her own story that demands its own scrutiny. That is not good enough. She is not a footnote. She is not from the background. She is a woman who has been charged with 8 criminal counts related to the welfare of her children, and she deserves, and the public deserves, the same serious, unflinching examination of her case that her husband's case has received. That is what this channel exists to do. Not to destroy anyone, not to convict anyone before a jury has spoken, but to ask the questions that matter, to follow the story wherever it actually leads, to refuse to look away when the story gets complicated or uncomfortable, or when it points toward truths that challenge the narratives we've been sold. The Kendra Duggar story is complicated, it is uncomfortable, and it points toward truths that a lot of people would rather not examine. We are going to examine them anyway. April 29th is coming. We will be there. We will have the full breakdown the moment that courtroom hearing is over. We will cover every development in this case. Joseph's proceedings, Kendra's proceedings, the legal strategies, the plea deal possibilities, the custody implications, all of it, right here. If you are not subscribed yet, this is the moment. Hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, because this story is one of the most layered, most significant cases involving family, faith, and child welfare that we have seen in years, and it is nowhere close to being over. Share this video with someone who only knows half the story, because now you know the half that nobody is talking about. Kendra Duggar was arrested too. 8 counts. And we are just getting started.